Differing from the other Mahasangika schools, the Lokottarvadins deified the Buddha and held the view that the Buddhas are otherworldly, Lokuttar, for the reason that not only their thought is always perfectly pure, but also because they remain outside and above the world. Consequently, Lokottarvadins distinguish between the real, transcendent and infinite Buddhas, Dharmakaya, that is the body of the Dharma on the one hand, and the apparent Buddha, Nirmankaya, that is the body of magical creation, who is a kind of apparition arising from the real one on the other hand. In order to rescue beings, the Nirmankaya incarnates, adopting their form and thus appearing to be born, growing up, discovering, preaching the doctrine of enlightenment, and finally dying and becoming fully extinguished. On account of their supernatural conception of the Buddhas, the Lokottarvadins appear to have also extolled the extraordinary character of the Bodhisattva. On this basis, it has been suggested that this sect may have played an important role in the formation of the Mahayana. Pragyapativadins believed that all things are a mere creation of linguistic convention, pragyapti, and are therefore devoid of actual existence. It has been suggested that this view of the Pragyaptivadins gave birth to the theory of universal void, shunyata, an important element of the Mahayana doctrine of Shunyavad. The Sarvastivadins, the Samityas and the Purvashailas firmly believed in an antrabhav, that is temporary existence of being after death and before birth, that works as a link between one existence and another. The Theravadins and the Mahasangikas completely rejected this concept. The Mahasangikas, along with the Andhakas and the Sarvastivadins, upheld the view that the Bodhisattva may be born in evil existences, that is Durgati, including different hells, to lighten the sufferings of the beings who live there. The Theravadins denied that this was possible because in their view the circumstances of rebirth depend completely upon the automatic retribution of all actions. According to the Vatsiputriyas, the Samityas, the Sarvastivadins and the Purvashailas, the Arhats could fall from their status to even losing Nirvana, but the Theravadins, the Mahasangikas and Sautrantikas rejected such a notion. The Theravadins, the Sarvastivadins and the Dharmaguptaks were in agreement that gods were capable of practicing brahmacharya, that is sexual abstinence, of ascetics, but the Samityas and the Mahishaskas believed this to be impossible. For the Theravadins and the Sarvastivadins, there were only 5 fates, gatis, namely those of gods, men, animals, hungry ghosts, that is pretas, and the damned. The Andhakas and the Vatsiputriyas added one more to these 5 fates, the 6th one, that of the Asuras, the superhuman beings who were adversaries of the gods, devas, yet were not devils. The Andhakas, the Sarvastivadins and the Samityas believed that the clear understanding of the Four Noble Truths was gradual. The Mahasangikas, the Theravadins, and the Mahishaskas suggested that it was instantaneous. Unlike the Mahasangikas, the Theravadins, the Sarvastivadins did not believe that chitta, that is thought, is inherently pure and gets contaminated only by accidental impurities. Whereas the Theravadins, the Vatsiputriyas and the Samityas recognized Nirvana as the only unconditioned, that is asamskrit dharma. The majority of the other sects also believed empty space, that is akash, as an unconditioned dharma. There were several sects that appear to be veering towards Mahayana that taught that dependent origination, Pratitya the Eightfold Path, Atangiko Maggo, and suchness, Tathata, or permanence, Sthitata, of things were equally absolute and unconditioned. Several important debates centered on the nature of the passions, particularly latent passions or tendencies, and active passions or obsessions. The Mahasangikas, the Andhakas, and the Mahishaskas made it a very precise distinction between them, and the Theravadins and the Sarvastivadins saw in them just two aspects of the same passion. For the Theravadins and the Sarvastivadins, tendencies and obsessions were connected or co-functional with thought. According to the Mahasangikas, the Vatsiputriyas, the Samityas, and the Mahishaskas, tendencies are unconnected and do not co-function with thought, but obsessions are connected to it. However, the Andhakas believed that obsessions and tendencies are equally separate from thought. According to the Sarvastivadins and the Vatsiputriyas, ascetics of non-Buddhist beliefs could also, through their efforts, obtain the 5 lesser supernatural faculties and thus work miracles such as perceiving the thoughts of others, seeing their past lives, recollecting the rebirths of beings as conditioned by their past karma. However, the Mahishaskas and the Dharmaguptakas totally disagreed and believed that like the attainment of nirvana, only Buddhist ascetics treading the path of enlightenment could acquire the 5 supernatural faculties. The relation between matter, that is Roop, and the process of ripening, that is Vipak of karma, also led to the rise of disputes. For the Theravadins, matter is independent of the ripening of karma and not the fruit of its ripening. Moreover, they believed that matter is morally neither good nor bad, but inherently neutral. As compared to this, for the Sarvastivadins, Samityas, and Mahishaskas, when matter participates in a good or bad act through the body of a man, it becomes good or bad. Matter is also the fruit of ripening when it turns into the body of a handsome or ugly person at birth as a consequence of past karma. The Sarvastivadins believed that the 5 forms of sensory perception are invariably connected to passionate desires, ragas. However, whereas according to the Mahasangikas and the Mahishaskas, they are sometimes associated with them and sometimes not, the Vatsiputriyas rejected both these possibilities, announcing that the 5 forms of sensory perception are morally neutral by nature and can never be either good or bad. With the exception of a few important sects such as the Theravadins, not much information is available in the literary sources on the history of these sects except the testimony of inscriptions. Except Theravada, all these early sects had become extinct by the time of Xuanzang and I Ching, who visited India in the 7th century. However, a considerable amount of the canonical literature of some of these sects has survived, primarily in their Chinese translations. Of all the many groups descended from the original Mahasangikas, only the Lokuttarvadins were still numerous and thriving, but only in Bamiyan, now Afghanistan. It is noteworthy that as Mahayana had never attempted to have a separate Vinaya or ordination lineage from the early Buddhist schools, it could be said that every monk or nun adhering to Mahayana formally belonged to an early school. Therefore, Mahayana was never a separate rival sect of the early schools. While Mahayana monastics belonged to a Nikaya, not all members of a Nikaya were adherents of Mahayana. In fact, Xuanzang and I Ching point out that in India, both Mahayana and non-Mahayana monks every so often dwelled in the same monasteries side by side. No area was the sole sphere of influence of any one group, certain groups being in majority in some places, in majority in other places. In fact, Xuanzang and I Ching point out that in India, both Mahayana and non-Mahayana monks every so often dwelled in the same monasteries side by side. Thank you so much.